Wingman Joker, thank you for listening to this channel and please support the channel. Please subscribe. Chapter 07, Magical Circuits. By the time Adrian returned to his room, he had both a slap mark and a smile on his face. He didn't care about the former as the poison in his body had now been completely purged. And it was really his fault for grabbing Crystal's towel by mistake. He was just in a hurry, and with his current shitty body coordination, he almost fell and had no other choice but to grab it, right? Anyway, now that the poison problem was solved, Adrian began to plan his next step toward his first goal, passing the family assessment. This was the crucial step to not only get back all the things they took from him but also to secure a stable starting point for his life. Living in a myriad of other worlds had taught him an invaluable lesson. Nothing can beat being an heir to a filthy rich family. A solid background was the best way to secure a comfortable life. Affirming his resolve, he sat at his desk, and brushed away all the stupid school books that filled it, pushing them to the floor before he took a notebook and began sketching on it. What he was doing was drawing a magical circle. A very familiar one to anyone who tried to dabble in magic. Hell, this thing can even be found on posters and coffee mugs all around the world. It was the Zero Magical Circuit, the basic block of all magic. In this world, every child, as soon as they could open their eyes, would be tested for the suitability of magic. This meant the existence of a special kind of structure within the child's blood veins and organs. If such a structure existed, the child would be declared as having magical affinity, and once he is old enough, he would be quickly given the first tasks. To collect mana from the air, convert them into elementary blocks that they call mana threads, then use those to construct a zero magical circuit. Most children accomplish this by the age of 8. Adrian, who did it at the young age of 5, was considered a genius. Once the zero magical circuit was established, it would form the foundation on which all the higher magic circles would be built upon. Magical circuits were the main method by which a magician would make the mana change and form before casting it as a spell to change the world around him. Sadly, in the current world, although many things about them had been figured out using ancient text or by trial and error, no one really knew how those circuits really worked. Adrian knew. It is all thanks to his otherworldly trip. Magical circuits were simply, just logical circuits that had the capacity to conduct and control mana. If Adrian were to compare them to something, the first thing he would think of was the old hardware that the computers in different worlds used. Those circuits controlled mana just like transistors controlled electrical currents, transforming them and doing different operations. The more intricate and dense a magician's circuits were, the more powerful, faster, and advanced they would become. The zero circuit was the basis for any spell. It was the way in which a magician would allow the mana to enter his body and exit as magic. They were basically like a BIOS, the basic chip that manages the basic input and output of a computer. People who had only this are not generally considered magicians, just normal people with high mana affinity. The real magic starts with the first circuit, which in a way acted as a main CPU, not only very versatile and responsible for most of the operations, but it is also the basic building block to connect all the other circuits, which made the magicians grow more powerful. After that, just like how adding other components to a computer, like a GPU or Wi-Fi modem, can enhance its capabilities, by adding more circuits a magician can gain extra powers and more magical affinities. The possibilities were endless. This might all sound amazing, but unfortunately, unlike a computer which could be bought from a store, magical circuits couldn't. They had to be built from the ground up by magicians using the mana that they collect in their bodies, using blueprints, prints, and techniques that no one really understood, except for Adrian, that is. The building process was extremely hard and got harder and harder the higher the circuit that the magician was trying to establish was. Every human's meridians were different, and magicians would need to adapt a circuit to fit their own body, and this process got harder and harder the more complex the circuits were. The process also depended on many variables like the magician's meridians compatibility and gifts, not to mention the magician's ability to access and comprehend the blueprints that were needed to construct the circuits he wanted. Those blueprints by themselves were very rare, and combined with the set of compatible skills and magical techniques needed for one to become a magician, were called a legacy. Magical legacies were the most precious thing in this world, as for the most part, they were not created by anyone but originally found in some very ancient temples that no one knew who built. Legend has it that about 3,000 years ago, a great accident happened when the entire sky burnt for a day and a night. After that, demonic monsters began to appear in the world and wreaked havoc everywhere, destroying entire kingdoms in a span of months. Just when humanity was at its darkest hours, magicians appeared. They were a group of people who accidentally hid in one of the temples, and by chance, they managed to activate an ancient array and get a legacy, allowing some of them to wield magic for the first time and fight the monsters. Slowly, as those first mages taught others and as more and more adventurous people dived into the temples and got more legacies, humanity once again managed to counterattack and regain a huge part of the land to establish 3 empires that ruled the entire world. Well, not all of it, just the 50% that was still habitable as it was discovered later. The other parts were so corrupted by demonic energy that they couldn't support human life, so they were isolated and contained by creating huge magical arrays that stopped that energy. Anyway, just like history proved again and again, once the demonic monsters were no longer a threat, humans began to fight each other. When a great magician appeared and wanted to create a 4th empire, he was declared a demon king by the others, and the rest was history. This war lasted 1,000 years as more and more opportunist people who wanted power appeared. It not only resulted in the collapse of the old empires but also the loss of many of the legacies that began to be sought and hidden by many of the fighting powers who forbade normal people from practicing magic, wanting to grab the power for themselves. On top of that, when no one was paying attention, the human domain shrunk by another 10% as the demonic energy corruption extended after the old magical arrays were no longer maintained. The demonic monsters once again began to roam the world unhindered. This forced all the fighting parties to finally sit at the table and agree to end the war and to divide the world between the surviving powers, who were composed of 7 great powers who had the only complete legacies in addition to a few other weaker ones who was weaker to some extent. They also agreed to create the Magical Council, which was a mutual power responsible for fighting the demonic monsters, maintaining the magical arrays, and teaching new magicians. To establish this, all the powers were required to offer a part of their hidden legacy to the tower, who in turn passed it to the public and once again allowed the people who had the gift of magic to be magicians and fight for themselves. It was all good, though there was a catch. The powers only gave the public a part of their legacies, not all of it. They feared the world would be another demon king who grabbed power from them. They created the current system in which many of the blueprints and spells up to the 4th level were available to the public, but anything after that was hidden. Anyone who wanted to advance after that level would have to either become a disciple to one of the ruling powers and gain access to their heritage, or try his luck with some blueprint of an unknown origin and risk ending up at a dead end. Nowadays, with the advance of magical knowledge and the excavation of the ruins from before the war, there were already a few 5th and 6th ranked blueprints and spells available to the public. They were not cheap at all. Most people chose the former, as just like how with computers certain software only worked on certain hardware, certain magical spells, that were the software in essence, required certain magical circuits that were only available in certain legacies and were completely incompatible with others. And the strongest 7 powers held most of those spells in their hands, so most of the gifted magicians flocked to work for them. Usually, a magician would choose which power he planned to follow way back when he was building his 2nd circuit, by choosing a suitable blueprint, as each of those had their own benefits and demerits. A magician who wanted to throw fireballs would have to follow a different blueprint from those who wanted to cast ice or be healers. Finally, when such a magician finished their 4th circuit and got ready to finally build the 5th, they would get a chance to either formally join the power that controlled his legacy as a disciple or as an affiliate. The latter was someone who was formally under the Magical Council's supervision but paid loyalty to the power that owned the legacy he was using. He also would have to swear a magical oath to get access to the hidden blueprints. Right now, despite the most complex legacies containing 13 levels, the highest number of circuits reached by anyone was 10. The people who managed to reach such a stage were called archmages, as they had the power to not only control the weather but also move entire mountains. In this day and age, there were 9 of them, of which, Adrian's great-grandfather, the now retired patriarch of the Red Oak family, was one. 7 of the other 8 remaining archmages belonged to the other 6 great powers, and the last was an eccentric who managed to find his own legacy by chance. What Adrian was planning to do at the moment was pure madness. He was planning to recreate the Zero magical circuit from scratch. At the moment, in this world, there were only 5 known different blueprints of Zero magical circuits. Of those, only 2 were widely circulated as they were very compatible with each other and with 90% of the legacies available. Adrian was going to make a new circuit that was not only compatible with his family's legacy, but also 2 times smaller and 10 times more efficient. It would allow any magician who used it to be 10 times faster and stronger without any extra costs. He paused. No, he shall keep the improvement to only double the performance for now. Any more than that might make his family a little too power drunk. The really good stuff shall be kept for him and the power he planned to create. Wait, When did he say he was planning to create a power? Damn, those soul fragments and their wild thoughts. Adrena quickly shook his head. What he was after was something else entirely. Enhancing the circle would allow him to use a loophole in the family rules that dictated that if any heir were to improve, or enhance the family's legacy by more than 1% by any means, he would be granted a 0 family rank, the rank only reserved for the supreme elders and the old patriarch. At that rank, the family would have no choice but to return all the things they took from him. Adrian smirked, imagining the shocked expression on those stinky geezers' faces when he presented his upgrade. He shook his head. Enough with the stupid thoughts, it was time to work. He slowly began modifying the magical circle sketch on paper, removing and adding small symbols all around it. The knowledge of how to do this came from one of the worlds he was in, where he used a supercomputer to decode how circuits worked, magic to convert them from abstract concepts to manageable logical gates. The only downside of his current epic was that he had no debugger software or a computer to help him catch any bugs, so he needed to calculate many things repeatedly by hand, one part after another, to make sure there were no mistakes. He was the first who was going to try this after all. And on top of all of this, there was one extra thing to consider. Not making the circuit too overpowered. Knock knock. A knock on the door that opened moments later startled Adrian, who was engrossed in his work. It was his foster father, Logan. Adrian, you will be late for school, Logan said worriedly. Adrian returned late last night, not having dinner, and now he didn't come down for breakfast. There was also the accident with Crystal last night. The foolish girl missed the chance of a lifetime. Still, if anything were to happen to Adrian, many heads might literally roll. So Logan had to check on him. Oh, it is morning already. Adrian finally noticed. It was no longer night, but morning. Damn it, this took way longer than he anticipated, and he only managed to finish about 10% of it. This won't do at all. He still needed to reach the 3rd rank before the assessment. The time he had was too short. You stayed up all night? Logan, who was surprised that Adrian was not in his bed, asked. Was that slap last night too much for him? Ah, what? Yes, thinking about the future, Adrian nodded as he thought about something. Oh, Logan sighed, so it was the slap after all. Uncle, I need a favor, Adrian suddenly said. What? Logan asked. Adrian rarely asked him for favors. Could it be that he finally wanted to marry Crystal after seeing her naked? The assessment is in a few days and I want to try one last time to activate my magical circuits. Adrian said, I want you to give me a room in the hotel where I won't be distracted. He added as he stood up from the desk and began to stretch. It would be tight, but with 6 full days, he might be able to finish everything just in time if he went all out. Oh, Logan sighed in disappointment, then frowned, noticing the complex magical circles and scribbles Adrian was working on. You plan to skip school? At this point, does it matter? Adrian shrugged. I have one last trick I want to try, but I need to focus all my efforts on it without distractions. Fine, but I will have to ask for your father's permission, Logan sighed again. Please do. Adrian nodded. He was forbidden from directly contacting his father after his banishment. Wait a moment then, Logan said, leaving to make a call. Most phones in this world use landlines. Phones that could be carried were very expensive and could only make connections to 4 or 5 pre-registered targets. They used mana after all. Adrian nodded as he watched Logan leave, turning to rearrange the scattered papers containing the theory he planned to present at his assessment. After finishing with this, he needed to use it to reconstruct his magical circuits. This was going to be a tough week. Logan returned 5 minutes later. Your father agreed and I already called the hotel and arranged a room for you, Logan sighed. Be prepared though, if you were to fail your assessment, you would have to work for 1 month without pay to cover your bill, he shrugged. His father really couldn't help him. I know, Adrian nodded as his stomach grumbled. Now I should probably go get something to eat. Come on then, Logan said as he began to walk, then paused. Just make sure not to argue with Agatha, she is a little furious about what you did to Crystal last night, he whispered. What did I do? Adrian asked with a frown. He had completely forgotten.